This is Friends Who Talk About Money from John Hancock, a show where we take on the money taboo and celebrate the power of financial conversations in all their honest, awkward, and inspirational glory. I'm your host, Claire Wasserman, writer, career coach, and financial advocate. Career changes are hard and scary and, let's face it, costly. But what if the cost comes with more family time, more freedom, and more emotional fulfillment? On today's episode, we're inviting a couple to talk about how they shifted their lifestyle, career paths, and finances in order to spend more time at home with their two daughters. We'll discuss how they're navigating financial stability and adjusting goals to accommodate a shift in household incomes. You'll also hear from Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, financial therapist and coach, about ways to reach financial and emotional balance. Time to talk money. Hey, Holly and Jamie, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourselves. I want to know where you're from, how old you are, and what are your occupations?
I'm from Philadelphia, born in Philadelphia, grew up, went to college, stayed there until last year. I'm 36, I think. And I'm a global program manager for a technology company.
I'm Jamie. I was born in Jersey, but I grew up in Puerto Rico. I was a UX designer for years and years and years. In fact, I still do it in a freelance capacity, but my main job is being a stay-at-home dad.
So how did you guys meet?
We actually met when we worked together the second time. We were both working for a e-commerce company. Jamie was a designer. I was in project management, and we worked around each other for a couple of years. And then I left, and he eventually joined the company I went to. And that's where we actually met. So I was his project manager, and we just really hit it off. Meetings would end, and we would just stay in the conference room chatting until somebody came and kicked us out. I guess we started dating in November of 2014. We got married October of 2015. And then we were expecting our first daughter in January of 2017. And then we bought a house when we had our first daughter. We had a second baby and realized we needed to move out of the city, and then decided that if we were going to move anyway,
move all the way out of the city.
Yeah, move cross country and see what else we wanted to change in our lives to make it one big move with the girls and then go from there.
I'm curious, before you got married, before you had your first daughter, how much did you talk about money? How much was money part of the conversations that you were having then?
I think a lot. We had both gotten out of prior relationships where they weren't.
We were not aligned with our significant others. So
I think we were both pretty happy and surprised to see that we were both savers. We both like to save money, and we both were open to talking about finances.
And I don't know that it was ever conversations that started out being like, "Hey, baby, let's talk about money," but it would be like me going, "Hey, baby, let's go to Iceland?" And he'd be like, vacations cost money. And then we would have conversations about the fact that he hadn't had vacation in 6 years, and how much I like to go on vacation, and how I prioritize my money that way. And it would just kind of always lend itself to that. And then we moved in together very quickly as well. And that was a good crash course in seeing how the other one was spending
or not spending,
and kind of seeing where we matched up. And it also was a big factor because Jamie was working full time at the time, but also freelancing on the side. So I got really used to, the fact that earning as much as he could was really something that he had focused on for a long time. And I think it was also some of a balance of saying that's great, but we also need to spend time together. And we also have we now have a social life together. So 40 hours of freelance on top of 40 hours of employment was not going to be it was not long-term if we wanted to hang out together.
And it was also probably healthier for me.
Yeah, there was that too.
What about when you talked about having a family? Did you have conversations about money and, who was going to work, if anyone was going to stay home?
Because we started out as friends, I think it was probably the first week that we were dating, Jamie said something to me like, if we ended up having a child together, got married, did all those things, would you ever be interested in staying home? And I said, I don't know. That seems really hard. I'm not sure. Definitely on board for a baby, but I don't know that I'd want to stay home. And he said, would you be opposed if I ever stayed home or freelanced? I think somebody else at work had done that, and it was like, oh, that's like an option. So I knew really early on, before we were together, we both knew that we were people who had aspirations of having
we
a
wanted
family.
kids.
And then we got to planning for a baby. And I think it was first trimester where I got super upset because I was like, I've been running numbers and I don't know how one of us stays home like right away because like, I just don't know if it works out. We wanted that. It wasn't as much of a crisis as my hormones told me it was. But by the time we got to baby 2, we had done more planning in advance and we were able to do that. We were able to make it so that Jamie could freelance, and I was not crying during a trimester for that reason.
So when you were looking at a one parent income for your family, how did that change your finances at all when you were sort of looking ahead for financial planning? Were there things you were going to have to sacrifice, or what were those conversations like?
As soon as we decided that that was going to be something we wanted, we had started looking at real estate in the Philadelphia area. And we played with the price right away. We knew that like the house we wanted in Pennsylvania with property taxes and all that stuff and older homes that need a lot of work was going to be really a lot less than what we had in mind. But I'm trying to think about whether or not we decided Fort Collins before we decided that you would stay home. Like we were going to move out of the area.
No, we decided that I was going to stay home. Like, remember, we did like a whole, like almost like whiteboarding thing where we looked at, it was really not just the idea of just one of us staying home, but it was like a whole life transformation where like, what's the life that we want to have, where we're around each other more often, where we get to spend more time with each other, like not just the kids, but me and Holly as well. Like we don't have to commute. Can we do that? Can we work remotely?
We wanted to not pay for private school. Where we were in the city, we were probably going to end up going with private school because just logistics with the public schools and our work schedule. We worked late when we were commuting, and that's not something that they had coverage for in our public school system, among other things. So we knew that we couldn't pay for 2 private schools. I wanted to go to being 100% remote so we would be able to drop down to 1 car. So there's a lot of things where I said, like, there's easy places we can cut back here, and then there's big ones. So which one do you want to try first? And I think Jamie was the one who was like, well, if we're gonna do it and be on 1 salary, we should just try and put my paycheck away and see what we have to do to make that work. So that's what we did. For the entire time I was pregnant, we just wanted to see what that would look like and how much we might have to pull from savings if we were 1 salary family, which also kind of gave us a test run, and it upped our savings like tremendously.
Did you feel the squeeze, during the time that you put his salary away? I'm curious, like, were you ever in a store going, oh God, I want it, but I can't have it?
I was never a shopper. I was never like the stuff, but it would be friends who were like, oh, we're going to go do this chef's tasting in Philly and you should come with us. Or, when we were looking for cars and realized we wanted like an SUV and being like, oh, maybe we're not going to get the 2017, we're going to get the 2015. Those were definitely things where it was like, oh yeah, if we add that on here, it's going to be tight. I think the other hard thing is we were still paying for daycare when we were doing that. So between daycare and our mortgage, that was an entire one of my paychecks every month. So what was left was what was left. And there were months where we had to dip in to savings for sure.
Jamie, did you feel any sacrifices that you had to make when you decided to put your salary away?
Lunch. Yeah, that would happen. I tend to stress eat, so it was actually kind of better for me. So there was like I was doing jujitsu at the time, so we had to that was an expense. So we cut that. Gym memberships, stuff like that. I think if the sacrifices were too great, I don't know if we would have fully jumped in.
We wouldn't have stuck with it.
Yeah.
Same thing as like if we had put a line in the sand and said, I'm never going to go out with my friends, or I'm not like all date nights are canceled, anything that restrictive it just wouldn't have worked.
Well, I think that's why we played it smart, because we were like, we kind of know ourselves and each other that like we can't just be all or nothing. We have to, find some balance. Because at the end of the day, the thing that we wanted out of this is that we could enjoy it.
I think what helped me mentally was that I know Jamie's he's got grit and he works really hard, but he was going to make it work if, something went off and we couldn't do it. We had the same discussion, like if I had lost my job, like what would we do? And like who goes back to work and how quickly we switch gears.
And you were always good about like, you did the financial spreadsheets and you would look at our savings and you would always tell me that like, if we both lost our jobs,
we can survive on our savings for X months. That was the game I always played. And that just helped me mentally be prepared.
And I would say much the same about Holly that she said about me, that like we're both tough people. Like we both had to work
early
and multiple jobs and get ourselves like apartments and get through college. And, we didn't have like a big financial backing. So it was one of the things that I loved about you. I love that you were so tough. And it definitely gave me the confidence that like we could pull this off because, we're both smart enough to know before it's too late, if we needed to stop it, if we needed to, pull back.
I think I was nervous that by saying like, you can stay home and you should raise our girls and we're going to do this, that was me signing up for something for forever. Like you should stay home forever. And like, you don't need to freelance. And if I lose my job, I will bag groceries until I find another job or work 6 jobs until I find another job or whatever is the fastest way to getting an income back. And I think that was just all historic trauma for me and not actually based on reality where, I knew Jamie coming back. If I lost my job, if financial or, just luck changed, we would just scramble until one of us, whoever got a job first. And that would probably have been the competition. Who gets a job first?
Something that I really loved that you talked about earlier, or this is how I interpret it, was kind of the role that emotions play in financial decisions. So working backwards from if I lost my job, how big is our runway? And A, that's smart financially, but B, emotionally, it allows you to not be so anxious when you take risks. So I want to hear a little bit more about the role that emotions play in finance for you guys.
In Colorado, kind of end of March is when things started to feel really real with the pandemic. And we were buying a house April 1st. So we talked a ton about whether we should cancel, whether we should delay, how stupid it was to do a massive, like your biggest financial purchase, right as uncertainty in the market and in our jobs was really scaling up. That is when I needed to do a lot of work on what makes me feel comfortable. And that's where I needed a worst case scenario. So when Jamie's talking about like spreadsheets before we did this, that was nothing compared to March, where it was, all right, if we have to cash out our 401ks, if we have to like stop contributing to the 529s, if we have to, they just changed unemployment. What does that look like? To basically say how much we could pay, like how long can you pay your mortgage in a pandemic? And, is this really the right time? My feelings were that if I knew what the worst case scenario was, I could keep that as my guiding light on things like home improvement stuff and making sure that we weren't overextending ourselves with the house. But that ultimately we did want to be here long term. This wasn't going to be a short term or a move up later sort of purchase.
I think everything you said was absolutely spot on. I remember those discussions and those conversations we had about this. And
do you feel like we've had more now
about
money, emotions, feelings of money?
Feelings about money? Have we talked? I think they've been basically the same. I think there was like definitely a ramp up before we made a major purchase about how we were feeling about that. But you've always been good about that. Like that is your go-to. You say like, what is the worst case scenario? And then you kind of work your way back from that. And it's a really smart thing to do. Just looking at the savings, right? Like we put money away for a good reason. We probably both have some amount of anxiety when it comes to money or it's not really so much the money, it's more the insecurity, right? And so we put our money away to kind of stave that off. Mm-hmm. And like whenever we reach a new milestone in our savings account, I think I'm always
You're like, all right, how long till we can get to this next big number?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what does the future look like for you guys?
Right now, because of the pandemic, we have a lot of things. We keep saying savings, and we mean savings. It's just in our high yield savings account, which is a silly place for like a lot of money to sit. My very limited financial knowledge tells me that that's silly. But until things start to stabilize or I have a better understanding of like what's going on in the market, because I really don't get it right now, we'll probably just kind of keep sitting on a lot of cash and seeing how much we put in there. We are also part of the group of people who didn't pay their taxes until this new July 15th deadline. So that's going to be fun. because Jamie is a 1099 freelancer, in case that wasn't clarified earlier. So there will be taxes that will be paid. I think the next goal is to start cutting through a lot of debt. When I'm unsure about career stuff or when there's like any sort of unrest, I do make the mistake of putting a lot of things on credit card because I would rather have a big pile of cash and know that I could just wipe out the credit card when I'm ready, versus not having the cash if we need it. We're at the point where we're just going to start wiping through debt more systematically. Jamie didn't say his birthday earlier in the call, but he'll be 40 this year. And we originally were going to go on a big trip to celebrate his birthday. And since we will not be doing that, we are going to try and pay a big chunk of his school loans that are still floating around, because that is actually a gift that he would prefer than a big vacation.
That's true.
Because he's insane.
No, you're thinking long term. It's like, yay, student loans. Oh, God, it's so sad that that has to be a celebration. But you know what? It does. It does. And you're doing a great job. I mean, you talked a lot about savings. Do you have any tips for people listening about how they can save?
I guess my main thing is that, like, if you think you can't, you probably can. You can always put something away, and that little something starts to add up.
I would say that there's two ways to pad your savings, right? It's either earn more or spend less. And it's totally that simple. And that doesn't not mean it's easy, but it is that simple. So if you are spending more than what you are bringing in and you know where that's going, I think that's step one, is like figure out where it's headed. And you look at that and go, these are all real bills. I cannot eliminate any of these things to put money into savings. You've got to then try and see what do you have to do to improve your career and your paycheck? And is that a side hustle? Is that asking somebody for more money or finding a job that will pay you more money and taking that, or getting a counter? But there's really no other magic you can do until you know what you're spending and how that matches with what you're earning.
And I do think that, like, it gets easier as you go. Like, as we were putting my check away into savings, like, at least for me, it was like, I think you mentioned earlier that, like, as that savings started to grow, no matter how much it grew, I was always like, okay, what's that next number we can get to?
Well,
and that would, I don't know, for whatever reason, that brought me a lot of comfort. Yeah,
for sure. Human beings aren't that different than goldfish, right? You give them a bigger bowl, you give them a bigger paycheck, you're going to spend the money. You just do. You give them a smaller bowl, and until there is a breaking point, there's a little bit of money that you are not going to be able to survive on. But once you get above that threshold, you can hide that money from yourself and have it when you need it, and it helps. It makes everything just feel a lot easier.
Okay, lightning round. This is the fun part, although hopefully all of this was fun. Who is more competitive? Go.
Jamie.
Sounds like you both are, because we talked about being competitive with our savings. So good, you're on the same page. Who pays the bills?
Holly.
Who is crankier in the morning?
Jamie.
I thought you guys might say our daughters.
No, they're just delightful. Jamie's just because he freelances at night, he stays up so late. He does not wake up well.
Thank you so much, Holly and Jamie, for being part of this. I feel particularly inspired when you talked about your whiteboard session.
There was a whiteboard.
We always have a whiteboard.
We have 2 whiteboards.
I am so excited to have Lindsay Bryan-Podvin on. She is a financial therapist and author who founded Mind Money Balance to help couples and individuals navigate financial wellness. Thanks so much, Lindsay, for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too.
Okay, so we just heard from Jamie and Holly. What are some things that you thought that they did well? I'm thinking about, their strengths that they showed in their relationship with money. So yeah, curious to hear from you what you thought they were.
Well, first of all, for anybody listening, Jamie and Holly are an anomaly in that they talked about money a lot in their relationship. And, who knows what goes on behind the scenes, but at least from what I got to listen to, it seems like they do it in a really healthy way. And some of the things that I picked up on as a financial therapist was their willingness to openly communicate about money and to be flexible about their financial plans. So I heard a couple of things that they said that they knew wouldn't work for them, right? They really were clear that being really harsh, black and white, and saying we're never going to go out to eat. That really helped them to check in with themselves and know what would work for them. And that allowed them to adhere to a financial plan. But what I think was they did so well was really decide what type of lifestyle they wanted and then crafted their finances to support that. For so many people, they go about it the opposite way, where they chase a number and think that their lifestyle will fit that number. But what we know is once you pick out how you want your life to be, then you can start to look for incomes that will support that lifestyle or living somewhere that will support that lifestyle. So they did a really nice job of leading with their values.
What are some recommendations that you have for them in order to keep moving in a positive financial direction?
So it's, again, they are doing really, really great. So it's not even recommendations. It's more like things to keep an eye on. So I heard a couple of elements of competitiveness or scrappiness, which can be really beneficial when it comes to attacking a financial plan. And at the same time, that intensity can also lead couples to burn out, right? To hit a wall and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so over paying down our debt, or I'm so over one of us staying home. We really need a change. And then in terms of like a practical thing, one thing that I could hear was causing some financial anxiety were these unexpected expenses, like the air conditioner or a car repair, and how those unexpected expenses really seemed to throw some anxiety into their relationship. Oh my gosh, now we've got to pull money out of this account. Now we can't do X, Y, and Z. And so one practical recommendation that I would have for them, and for most of the couples I work with, is to have a sinking funds account, or I call it an irregular expenses account, which is just this account that is, it's a little bit less restrictive than an emergency fund. It's more for those things that we know are going to happen. We just don't know when.
What are common pitfalls that couples can fall into when it comes to talking about money? And do you have advice for how to avoid them?
So some of the biggest pitfalls I tend to see are couples falling into a self-fulfilling prophecy that talking about money is going to be painful or uncomfortable or awkward in their relationship. So they avoid talking about it, right? They're like, well, that seems uncomfortable, so we're not going to do it. But what ends up happening is we all have to talk about money at some point. So when you have those money conversations, when emotions are already dialed up, it makes it really hard to have a healthy money conversation. So I always recommend to my clients to have regular money dates, which sounds so unsexy, but I promise you they're a lot of fun, which is just to regularly carve out time to check in on your financial goals as a couple. And the benefit of doing this regularly is that then you can talk about money when things aren't as heated.
I love that. When should you bring up money in a relationship, and how do you do that?
I think the sooner the better, quite honestly. If you are just starting to date someone, of course, it's going to be awkward to be like, hey, tell me what's going on in your 401k. That's probably not going to go very far. But I think it's worthwhile to at least start to suss out what's going on in a person's financial life and start to have serious money conversations. The same time in a relationship, you would start to have other serious conversations, such as, do you believe in marriage? Are you interested in having kids? What does your goal for your career look like? Right? So when we bring up those conversations that are important to a relationship, that's a good time to fold money into a relationship.
Let's talk a little bit about financial wellness. How do you define financial wellness? And, what advice do you have for listeners who maybe are just beginning their journey versus those who have found a solid mind-money balance?
I define financial wellness as having a healthy relationship beyond just your financial budget or your financial plan. I include having a healthy emotional relationship with your money underneath that umbrella of financial wellness. When it comes to folks who are just getting started, the main thing I hear is like, shame. Am I doing this right? I can't believe I didn't learn this early enough. I can't believe I'm so stupid, right? There's a lot of negative self-talk when it comes to engaging with money. And what I like to remind people, as I'm sure, Claire, you do too, is that we are not taught this. Very few academic curriculum has anything to do with personal finance, very few families talk about money openly. So to me, if you're just getting started, first just acknowledge that you are not alone. We do not learn about money, and taking those first steps is going to feel equal parts scary, but eventually you should start to feel your own power as your knowledge about financial literacy and financial wellness increases.
I love that phrase, you are not alone. That is exactly why we're doing this podcast, because we hope that listeners will basically see themselves in the guests that we have on. The first step towards information and liberation and power, it has to come from recognizing that this is bigger than you and there is a support network out there. You just have to be willing to raise your hand and say, who's in? I'm going through this. Thank you so much for being on this. I feel so much better. I feel less alone. I hope everybody listening does also.
Thank you, Claire.
A huge thank you to Holly and Jamie for letting us eavesdrop on their financial and emotional conversations, and to Lindsay for the much-needed therapy session. Remember, every financial journey is unique. Find your money story and share it with others. Be the parent, coworker, spouse, or friend who talks about money. Make sure to subscribe to Friends Who Talk About Money to hear the next duo chat dollars and cents. Talk soon.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers at the time of recording and are subject to change as market and other conditions warrant. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be, nor shall it be interpreted or construed as, a recommendation or providing advice, impartial or otherwise, regarding any specific product or security.